Hi, I hope you have enjoyed part 1 of tutorial 4 of the Xmgrace tutorials, where we have seen how to draw a bar graph using Xmgrace. It was a very simple bar graph where we had several bars with all with the same uniform fill patterns or the bar width or the thickness and so on. So everything, like whatever changes we tried to do to one bar were uniformly seen to the others. In the part 2 of tutorial 4, in this, we're going to see how we can customize the structure of each bar. So we're going to import data in such a way that each bar can be treated as an independent entity, as a separate graph, in fact. And we can play with the bar settings as and how we like to for each bar independent of the others. So before we do that, let me just show you the data that we have. So here, if you've noticed, I have the data laid out in one single row. So here, what we're trying to do is we want to import data column by column. Okay, and we want to import different blocks of data separately. So the first block, second block, third, fourth, and fifth. So each block of data has 3 different digits. So the leftmost one corresponds to the x-axis or the serial number. And the one at the center is basically the number of students who like a particular fruit. And the one on the right is an error bar. So plus or minus 1 or plus or minus 2. I mean, it's not very practical to have error bars for an observation like this, but you may be having data with error associated with it, with your measurements, and you might want to show it on your graph. So in this tutorial, I'm attempting to show you how we can have bar graphs with the error bars on it, and also how we can treat each bar independently of the other. So in order to do that, the key idea is to import each bar as a separate graph so that we will have 5 different graphs, which we're then going to superimpose on each other to get one graph. So the whole thing will look like one graph, but it's actually 5 different graphs superimposed, and you have 5 bars, which you can treat independently because now they are part of different graphs. So before we import this through command line, in order to do this in Xmgrace, it's not very easy. So it's kind of not complicated, but a lot of repetitions are involved. And the best way to do it would be to just using the graphical user interface of Xmgrace. So let's just open Xmgrace. As you can see, this is the Xmgrace window. And before we import the data, one key thing that we should be doing is go to plot, graph appearance. And in presentation type, we see XY graph. We don't want that. We want an XY chart so that a bar plot is allowed to be plotted, so that we have a bar graph. So we change that to XY chart and click accept. Okay, so after we have done that, we can feel free to import the data from data import as key. You just have a star there and click enter. Select data v2 and load as block data. We could try loading it as a single set, but if we in fact do load it as a single set, all the bars will be loaded as, you know, in one graph, and that way we can't tune the properties of individual bar independently. So change it to block data, and the set type, we want a bar graph. But then when you select bar, you only see the X and Y. So you have an X axis and data from the Y column. But we also have error bars, which we cannot use if we set the type as bar. So we want to change it to bar DY. So we can import the X data from column 1 and Y data from column 2, and the error associated with the Y data can be imported as Y1 from column 3. So this is the first block of data we're talking about regarding how many students like apples and what's the error associated with the measurement number of students who like apples. So 1 corresponds to the serial number of apple. 2 is the student corresponds to the number of students who like that information is in column 2. Column 3 has the error associated with it. Now click accept and close it. As you can see, you have a bar graph here. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing 4 more times because we have 5 different types of fruits we are dealing with. So we just have to repeat the observation 4 more times. And we want to generate 4 different graphs in addition to this. So let's go to edit, arrange graphs, and go to matrix. So column 1 and row 1 indicates we have 1 graph. Okay, I'm going to change row to 5 and make sure this is checked. Add graphs is needed to fill the matrix. So you want 5 rows and there's just 1 column. So basically you have 5 different graphs. Now click accept. Okay, there you go. You've clicked accept. Then you can notice one key difference. This is the first plot, the G0 data set that we've already plotted, the first bar, and the axes ranges are much different than the others. If you take a closer look, you can see that all the other 4 graphs have the same axis ranges, which is exactly what you would see when you open a blank Xmgrace AGR file. When you just type Xmgrace and open a file, those will be the axes or the axis ranges you see for a graph there. And these are the blank graphs. They don't have any data imported into them. So once we have done it, now we have blank graphs. We want to import the 4 different blocks of data, 1 in each of these graphs here. So go to data, import an ASCII. This is selected already. Now we want to import the second block in as G1 data set, block data. Okay, now select 4, 5, and 6 as bar dy. Accept. As you can see, you have another bar here. Don't worry about these 2 looking like they're at the same position. The axis ranges are different, so they're actually different. Don't worry about it. We will sort that out real quickly. We have G0, G1, then select G2. We had 4, 5, 6. Now it's time for 7, 8, and 9. Click accept. You see the 3rd bar, okay? Now G3, we're gonna have 10, 11, 12. Accept. You see 1 more bar here, right? Now G4, for the last block of data, 13, 14, and 15. And I'm gonna click accept. Sorry about that. So now that we have all the 5 blocks of data with us, we can simply close this. So you have all the 5 bars loaded as 5 different graphs. Now, the next thing to do would be to make sure that all of these graphs are overlaid on top of each other. So before we do that, we're gonna have to make sure they have the same axes ranges, right? So go to plot, graph appearance, and then go to plot axis properties. As you can see, G0 is selected as indicated by the 4 bold squares at the corners of this graph that indicates the data set G0 is selected. And we are going to change the x-axis ranges from 0.5 to 5.5. Okay, and give the major spacing as 1. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is just perfect. Okay, now to make these changes uniform through all of the graphs, you don't have to do it all the time. So just go to apply to all current axis, all graphs. So you're going to apply these changes to the current axis, which is the x-axis for all the graphs. Okay, So apply. As you can see, there the x-axis is all aligned for all the graphs. Okay, while we are at it, we might as well change the fonts, change Helvetica bold here. For a detailed tutorial on having the appropriate settings, check out tutorial 2. So we've applied the settings for the x-axis for all graphs. Now we don't want all the graphs to have the labels, the tick labels or the tick marks. I mean, when we are superimposing all the graphs onto one graph, it would just suffice that one of the graphs has these numbers and not every other graph. So a simple way to do it is you can go to main, look at the display options, and you can remove display tick labels, tick marks, display axis bar, and then click apply. Since you're applying to current axis all graphs, so all the graphs will not be displaying any of these tick labels or tick marks or axis bar. But then you want one graph to display them. So change the setting, apply to current axis, okay? And then display them. There you go. So you have displayed the changes in the current axis, like you have all the labels there, but everything else does not have any labels. Okay, so while we are at it, we might as well change the serial numbers to actual labels. And as you see, the apply to is still in current axis. So once you change it, it remains there for all of these fields. So special ticks, make them tick marks and labels, and just make them 5. We want them in place of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. In place of 1, we want apples, apricots, then berries, melons, bananas. And click apply. And as you can see, you have basically applied these changes to here. So you are good to go with the x-axis. Now go to the y-axis, okay? And the y-axis, change the settings from 0 to 18. We want the major spacing to be 2, okay? And we're gonna make a few changes with the fonts and Helvetica bold, the font sizes and so on. And let's do current axis all graphs so that all the graphs, for all the graphs, the y-axis changes. But then again, we don't want the tick labels or the tick marks to be, showing for all the graphs. So we'll do this so that it doesn't show for any of them. Then we simply change it to current axis and check these settings back in, and also give a label, which is number of students, and click apply. So we only, we have the settings only for the first graph, while for the other graphs, the settings are all the same. We just don't see them because it's not necessary to see them. We're just gonna superimpose them anyway. Now click accept. Okay, now that we are done with it, let's take a look at graph appearance. In order to superimpose them, it is very important that all the graphs have the same x minimum, x maximum, y minimum, and y maximum values in the viewport field. So how do we determine those ideal values? So let's start with G0, which is this, the first graph that we have. Let's maybe change the x minimum to 1. So you see it moves to the side, but there's a lot of white space, so we want to move to the other side. 1.4, that's way too much. 1.2 maybe, or 1.3, that's also a little too much. So 1.28, 1.29, it's pushing a little bit, so maybe 1.285. Okay, so this seems to be ideal. And y minimum, let's just try 0.15. And as you can see, we've come like this far, but there's still a lot of empty space there. So I don't know, maybe we can push it to 0.1 or 0.05. Yeah, 0.05 seems to be perfect, right? So now let's take a look at Y maximum. We have some white space here. So what if I make it 0.9? Okay, we can cover some space. What if it's 1? 1 is a little too much, so 0.98 maybe. Yeah, 0.98 seems to be perfect. Okay, then we need to adjust the spacing here. So maybe call it 0.1. And yes, 0.1 seems to work perfectly. So we're going to make sure that all the other graphs also have the same viewport settings of 0.1, 0.05, 1.285, and 0.98. So you can always go back here and check 1.285 and 0.98. So yes, these two have the same settings. 0.1, 0.285 maybe. Oh, sorry, it's 1.285, never mind. 0.05, 0.98. We have the same settings for G2. Now, as you can see, G0, G1, and G2 are aligned. So yeah, this is kind of a repetitive process. 0.1, 0.05, 0.285, 0.98. Okay, and one last time, you're gonna have to do this. Okay, and click accept. So there you go. You have perfectly cleared out the white spaces and you've aligned all the bars together in one graph, but you know that each of them is a separate graph, okay? So in order to tweak the properties of each of them, go to plot, select graph appearance, okay? Then go to plot and set appearance. Now, the first thing we want to do is change the width of the graphs. As you can see, G0 is selected here, and that's because in graph appearance, you have selected G0. So let's change the width to 300. And you can see the width has changed here. Maybe you want brown, I don't know, with a fill. There you go. But then the error bar needs to be thickened too. So go to error bars. Let's see what happens. Okay, so the bar line is basically this particular line. So maybe you can leave that at 100. That's not too bad. But we want to change the thickness of the bar line and also the riser line. And that does it. If you're wondering what is what, so this is the bar line and the vertical one is the riser line. So you're gonna have to do the same to the other 4 bars, and you can do it as and how you like it. So in order to go for the G1 dataset, go to graph appearance, double click G1, okay? When you double click G1, you can see that here G0 has changed to G1. Now, if I double click on G0, you see it is back to G0. It indicates that G0 is what you're applying changes to. Okay, now let's go back to G1. We've selected G1. We're gonna change the error bar thickness. And if you want to have a very wide bar, you could do that. And it's totally different from this, right? You can easily do that. And you can have a magenta fill, maybe with this pattern, right? And now let's go to G2. Let's change the width and change the thickness. And maybe fill it with cyan, and I don't know, you can pick this pattern or this pattern maybe, and change the error bar thickness and click apply. And there you go. Okay, now select another G3 dataset. You're gonna have to do it again and go to symbols, change the width, pick a color, maybe yellow. There you go. And let's just do it for one last time. You're in G4. You want to pick a color, probably, I don't know, violet, maybe a pattern. And a slightly different bar width if you want. And go to error bars, accept. And here you are. You've generated a bar graph in Xmgrace, technically 5 different bar graphs, all superimposed onto each other. So you have one bar graph ultimately. And you have each bar customized the way you like it, with the choice of your fill patterns or the fill colors or the bar widths and so on. Let's just go to graph appearance and go to frame, and also make sure it's 3 for all of them. It's a good practice to change the frame width also, and not just the axis bar properties. So yes, so our plot is finally ready. Okay, I don't see why someone would want to use these different patterns. Probably most people would go with a full fill color. But if you have a particular preference for any of this, you could always do this. It's not a big deal. So now that you have done it, make sure to save your plot, give it a name, maybe bar plot v1 or agr. I always try to version things because you never know if one version is the final version. So you've saved it as an agr file. Okay. You could also save it as a PDF file, which we've seen how to do, or you could save it as an EPS or a PostScript file if you want, PNG, JPEG, whichever you prefer. But a fair warning, like a small warning here, one thing you should remember is that some of you may not have the necessary drivers installed, for the PDF format. So when you try to save it as a PDF and you open it, the fill patterns may not show in the PDF. It may show as just a full fill color. You may not see the patterns in that kind of detail. And it's probably because of a few missing drivers. In that case, you could try to save it as a PNG or a JPEG or an EPS or a PostScript file. And when you're not using vector graphics, I would suggest you, if you want to not use them in situations like this when you can't use vector graphics, like PDF, and if you're going for PNG or JPEG, the one ideal thing to do would be to have an idea of the resolution you want or the size of the figure that you want, where you know that you're not going to compress it any further or enlarge it any further, and save the figure with that particular size and resolution, so that when there's no more compression or enlarging, at least at that given size and resolution, your figure looks perfect. There won't be any issues with it. So the data can be read off very easily from the figure. Okay. So you can just, if you want to save it as a PDF or maybe a PNG, for example, go to print setup, select PNG, make sure print to file is always there, you have PNG. And if you want a custom size, like I usually go for my favorite, 3.3 and 2.55. The resolution is 72, we don't want that. I go for the standard of 300 and click accept, maybe print. It says the output is truncated, but it actually isn't. It looks like it is, but when you look at the output, it isn't actually truncated. And sometimes it is truncated. So I think when you save it as a PDF, you won't see this message, but in some formats, the output could be truncated, in which case you might want to, change the size of the figure. But that's okay. I guess we've printed it already. Yes, we did. So we can just close this. Okay, and let me bring back the terminal. And here you see we have barplot.png. And there you go. Here you have the PNG file. Okay. Like I said, PNG is not very ideal. Like the fonts are kind of, like the whole figure is not great. You would have a whole new different quality when you're saving it as a, as a PDF file. So it's just one thing to keep in mind. So I guess that's it. And I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know, post them in the comments, and I'll try to address them. Questions not only about this tutorial, but also in general about plotting in Xmgrace, or if you'd like to know how to make certain different types of plots in Xmgrace and you're curious, you want to know, please post them in the comments and I'll try to add tutorials for the same. Hope you enjoy this one.